Now that we have studied the major parts of a sonata form, first the exposition, then the development and the recapitulation, and we have listened to an example to successfully identify where the exposition is by means of the repeat sign, finding the repeat sign, as well as the recapitulation, where we found the opening material from the exposition to return identical later in the piece. And you've also successfully identified the two key areas in the example, Mozart example that you listened to, as well as some major cadences, the significant cadence points within the exposition section. We will now get a little more technical to talk about the exposition section in depth. Okay. So the exposition of a sonata form can be considered as a journey through two key areas. Okay. As you've seen in the Mozart example, it starts in G major, which is the home key of the piece, and it moves to D major later on and stays in D major until the end of the exposition. So, journey through two key areas. And how do we call these two key areas? There are many different terms out there, and the first one I'm going to mention is what the authors of our book use. First theme group, and can be abbreviated as first theme group. Okay, and some people simply call this the first theme. Some people call this primary theme or primary key area, or simply the primary. Okay, and since the last one, primary, is the most concise one, I'm going to use that when we talk about the two key areas here. And the reason for all these different terms is some people feel like there's more than one theme in the same key. So simply using this term first theme is not enough. That's why they came up with this term first theme group. And primary theme, some people feel like first, second sounds like this is more superior, second is subordinate to that, so they don't like that term, so they came up with the term primary, and so hence these terms here, primary theme. But same thing, in the same key area there might be two thematic ideas, so some other theorists don't like this term primary theme, so they came up with this term primary key area. So just to make things simpler, I'm going to simply call it the primary in our future analysis. Okay, and the second one, as you can guess, is called the second theme group. And this is a term used in our textbook, or some people simply call this the second theme, or second. If they use primary theme, they'll be using secondary theme, or secondary key area, or simply secondary area, primary area, secondary area here. Okay, so the journey through two keys. Of course, there's more to that, but let's just use a chart that I made to quickly summarize this. So exposition, primary theme, secondary theme. And I also included the keys here. So if the sonata begins in a major key, the tonic, almost always in the secondary area, it's going to move to the key of the dominant. And if the sonata begins in a minor key, the minor tonic, and it's more often than not, it will move to two possibilities. It's relative major, so I marked it as a major 3 here, or a minor dominant here. So these are the common key schemes for the primary and the secondary key areas found in the exposition of a sonata form. Now that we've learned about the primary area and the secondary area and the common key schemes, of course, as you probably guessed, exposition has more. and there's why there's empty spaces here. Okay, so oftentimes between the primary key area and the secondary key area, the composer will write something to connect those two areas. And the material used to connect these two areas is almost always modulatory because we're moving from one key to another. And the melodic material usually gets busier because this area, the function of this part is to take us from one place to another, implying motion. So on the surface level, we often will see faster, shorter note values, faster rhythm, and harmonically, we usually start to see more harmonic instability because it's moving from one place to another. So we start to see more accidentals, and usually it will build the energy and land on a more dramatic cadence here, so that when the secondary key area comes in, is considered a resolution to that. Okay, so for that I also made a chart here. Let me bring that over. Okay, so primary theme, primary area, secondary area. As you can see, now those two areas are connected by what we call a transition. So transition is that linking passage, linking part between the primary key area and the secondary area. And as we said earlier, harmonically, this is usually harmonically the most interesting part because it's moving, it's going from one place to another. So it's modulatory and featuring tonal harmonic instability, and on the surface level we usually see rhythms getting busier, and a lot of different texture might also start to be different from what we heard earlier. So that's what we call transition. Okay. And after the transition brings us to the secondary key area, we'll get into an area of tonal stability, but now in a new key. So as we said earlier, if the primary area is in major, this is almost always in the dominant. If the primary area is in minor, this is usually in the relative major 3 here, or it could also be in the minor dominant. Those are the most common key schemes for the classical and early romantic period. And after, in late romantic, composers start to explore a lot of other tonal possibilities. Okay. And we just need one more thing before the end of exposition. So the secondary theme will get confirmed. So what we tend to find toward the end of the exposition is a cadence in the new key, a cadence of the secondary key area, a pretty clear cadence. What comes after that is a new thematic material in the same key of the secondary key area. But the melodic material will feature something a little different, usually more calm, since we're ending this section. And that's what we call the closing there. Okay, so we can come back here and write two more things. So between the first primary key area and the secondary key area, there's transition. And the feature of the transition, modulatory, oftentimes sequential, and it will features harmonic instability. There. Okay. And usually goes to a strong cadence. And this cadence is usually half cadence or perfect authentic cadence of the new key. Half cadence so that the new key can sound like a resolution to that. Perfect authentic cadence is just the goal of the transition. So this one the secondary area will just follow through. Okay. And after the secondary area coming to a more final cadence, this is usually considered just a little codetta after that. we have a closing here. So this we usually abbreviate transition as TR and closing CL. Right. Here's a final summary chart of the exposition section of the sonata form. As we learned earlier, journey through two key areas, primary key area, secondary key area, connected by a transition, ending with a closing theme. Okay. And transition, there are also two types of transition. Number one, what we saw in this chart and what we saw in the Mozart example, where the primary theme area, primary key area was marked very clearly by a perfect authentic cadence. So there, in other words, there's a very clear cadence point, stops. The next material transition begins after that. This type of transition is called an independent. But there will be times where we see the primary key area without a very clear, perfect, authentic cadence. Primary key area is clearly established, but we just never have that very clear, strong, perfect, authentic cadence to mark as the end of the primary key area. Instead, it just flows into the transition. So in that case, that's called a dependent. So just keep in mind there are two types of transition, and not in the classical period we probably find this one more, independent transition, but this is also very often seen, dependent transition, where the primary theme, primary key area, melodic material just flows into the transition without a very clear punctuation between the two. And transition builds up the energy, and usually transition will arrive at a strong cadence. Oftentimes it's half cadence of the new key, because half cadence, strong half cadence, when the new tonic comes in, it will sound like a sense of resolution to that. And also possible is a perfect authentic cadence in the new key, because that will just provide a very smooth transition into that. And this term here, medial caesura, this is what theorists, analysts like to call this cadence point, because it's not always the same type of cadence, not always half cadence, not always perfect authentic cadence, but it does provide a sense of caesura in the middle of the exposition section, hence the term medial caesura. And in the secondary, when we get to the secondary key area, we're going to find multiple 5-1. So several different 5-1 progressions there. Not all of them are going to be very clear cadence points, but we will nonetheless still be able to find several 5-1, just like what we found in the Mozart example. And so it's our job to identify which one is more significant. The one that's more significant will almost always introduce new melodic material after that. And after that point, that closing theme is usually calmer and bringing the whole exposition to a close.